All right, ladies and gentlemen, it is the first day of June, June 1st, 2020. Today, we are going to continue our discussion of World War II. Last week, we wrapped up how World War II concluded or finished in the Pacific. Today and this week, we're going to talk about human rights violations that took place during World War II. And specifically today, we are going to start talking about an event in World War II history called the Holocaust. And the Holocaust was discovered by Allied forces as they converged on Germany from the east and the west, especially from the east, where the Soviet army, as they pushed the Nazis back into Germany, found hundreds of camps and prisoners where they found that the Holocaust was taking place. And what is the Holocaust is the first question we're going to answer. The Holocaust is the systematic state-sponsored murder of 11 million people across Europe, especially Nazi-controlled territories, between 1933 and 1945. And the state-sponsored murder we're talking about here is the Nazi Germany state-sponsored murder of 11 million people across Europe. 6 million of the 11 million people killed, murdered, were Jews, and then the Nazis also targeted other groups like homosexuals, the Roma, who are sometimes referred to as gypsies. It's not a nice word to refer to them as, but that's how they're sometimes commonly referred to. Jehovah's Witnesses, which is a sect of Christianity, and people with mental or physical disabilities were among the other 5 million people killed by the Nazis. They also targeted other sorts of groups, like anyone that was to the far left of Nazi political ideology, people who went on strike, who didn't believe in fighting wars, people who prisoners of war, especially Soviet communists, were also among the 11 million people killed as part of the Holocaust between 1933 and 1945. Now, I know that a lot of you have read a book called Night by Elie Wiesel that you read in English class this year. What I want you to do for the do now, because some of the things we're going to cover today might be a review for you, but for the rest of the week, I want to answer the questions that you have about the Holocaust that you didn't think were answered in totality, either through today's lesson or what you learned in English. So there's a Google form in your note page. You're going to click on it, open it up. And if you have a question about the Holocaust, I want you to write it here and then submit. And if you have another question, you can actually open this form again and ask another question. And I will do my best to answer your questions on Wednesday and or Friday of this week. For now, we are going to move through a short video presentation talking about the Holocaust itself, why it's an example of genocide, and then kind of how the Holocaust came to happen in Nazi Germany. All right. So the Holocaust is an example of a thing called a genocide. Genocide is a word that was first used in 1944, or used as part of writing a history about World War II in Europe. And what it basically means today is that it's an attempt to destroy or kill all people that belong to some sort of group. So it can be a racial group, a religious group, an ethnic group, or a national group. If you do a Google search for the word genocide, which is what I have compiled here, you will see that it is a word that is associated with a great deal of death and suffering. So how did the Holocaust come to happen in Germany? Well, it starts with Adolf Hitler. Adolf Hitler came to power in Nazi Germany in 1933, but before he did, in the 1920s, after World War I, when Germany was struggling, he wrote a book called Mein Kampf, and that book was part autobiography, but also his ideas for what eventually became Nazism. And that book highlighted three major themes. He believed that the world and human history was basically a predetermined struggle between people of different racial groups, and in that history, he believed that Germans were the greatest race. He also blamed all of Germany's problems and really humanity's problems on Jewish people. And then because he believed that Nazi Germany and Germans were the greatest race, he believed in he talked about an aggressive foreign policy where Germany conquered and took over other places and people who were inferior to the Nazis in his belief, and that Germany should conquer and take them over so that Germany could eventually take over the world. People initially did not follow or believe very strongly in Adolf Hitler's beliefs and ideas, but he gained a great deal of popularity, and part of the way, because he was in a lot of ways, in some ways, charismatic, but also because he promised to fix a lot of Germany's problems at a time when Germany was struggling economically, socially, and politically. Adolf Hitler and his Nazi Party gained power in Germany in 1933 and immediately started to pass rules and laws to deny rights to Jewish people. More than 1,000 laws were passed between 1933 and 1945 that denied Jewish people of a wide variety of rights. In 1935, Jewish people, and even people who didn't really consider themselves to be Jewish anymore, were actually denied citizenship, or had their citizenship taken away. And then, the Nazi government created a definition of who was Jewish, and if a person was Jewish, they could not be married to someone who was German, and they weren't allowed to have romantic relationships with people who were German. Anyone who was considered to be Jewish by these new Nazi laws were taken out of or denied access to civil service jobs. They couldn't be teachers, lawyers, judges. Doctors who were Jewish couldn't serve as part of the National Health Service. They had their right. Jewish people had their rights to vote taken away. They were discriminated by police, and were all Germans had to carry identification cards with them, but Jewish people had theirs singled out with a red J stamped on those cards. Another example is that Jewish people were denied entry to beaches or to athletic facilities. There's a whole host of different laws and rules that you can read about here in this link. I'll post this slideshow for you. There's a number of other laws or examples of how Jewish people were denied their rights. And the purpose of these anti-Semitic laws, these anti-Jewish laws, these laws that denied rights to Jewish people, was to build up in and among the German people that there was something wrong with Jewish people. It was to segregate them from society and to dehumanize Jewish people, to make it acceptable to deny them rights or to discriminate against them. The government can be really, really powerful because it sets in its actions what's acceptable and what's not acceptable. And so when the German government, the Nazi government, began passing rules and laws that denied Jewish people rights and access to a whole host of services and locations and jobs, people in Germany started to believe that there was something wrong with Jewish people, and they began to believe in, if they didn't already, the ideas of the Nazi Party. Later on, starting in I think 1939, Jewish people were also forced to wear badges on their clothing to signify that they were Jewish. Typically, you can see here in this picture here, the badges were stars with the letter J stamped on them. This is two children wearing one of those badges in 1943 in Belgium after Germany had taken over Belgium. In Germany in 1938, the dehumanization of Jews continued with a government-sponsored pogrom. You remember a pogrom is when it's like a mob of people rioting or attacking Jewish businesses or Jewish people or synagogues, which is where Jewish people worship. Between the 9th and 10th of November 1938, this pogrom took place across Germany. Cities, towns, and villages, people were encouraged to attack and destroy or vandalize Jewish businesses, Jewish schools, or synagogues. In addition to that, subsequently, after the Kristallnacht, this night of broken glass, which is called the night of broken glass because so many windows of businesses were destroyed, 30,000 Jewish men, and this is the first time in Nazi Germany that people were arrested. 30,000 Jewish men were arrested and sent to concentration camps solely because they were Jewish. As Nazi Germany went to war with the rest of Europe starting in 1939, as the Nazis conquered and took over new territory, they started to force their anti-Semitic rules and ideology onto the places they conquered. Inside of Nazi Germany, as well, if you were Jewish, you could have they were forced to move into ghettos. Ghettos were isolated areas in cities that kept Jews away from non-Jewish populations, but also kept Jewish populations from interacting with each other. 1,100 ghettos were constructed throughout Europe under Nazi control. And when Jewish people moved into ghettos, they could be in these ghettos for a short period of time, 3 to 5 days, before they were moved somewhere else, or they could be there for a much longer period of time. And the conditions inside the ghettos were really terrible and awful. A lot of times Jewish people had their property or personal belongings or valuables stolen or taken from them by the Nazis when they were moved into the ghettos. And then oftentimes they had very little food, electricity, and the conditions inside the ghettos were really terrible. From ghettos, Jewish people and targeted groups were moved into concentration camps. Concentration camps started to exist were created right away when the Nazis first took power in 1933, but initially the concentration camps were for political opponents or people that the Nazis considered to be opponents, either real opponents or people they thought would be opponents to their regimes. However, as Nazi Germany got closer to World War II, to invading other countries and territories around the world, especially starting in 1938 and 1939, they became places where any undesirable group that the Nazis identified could be taken to these concentration camps and forced to work to fulfill a labor shortage that the Nazis were having, as they needed the production of military goods or construction materials to continue expanding. And the conditions in the concentration camps were, again, awful. The ultimate goal, especially in the later years of World War II, of the concentration camps were to work the people who were in the concentration camps to death. People in concentration camps lived in very tight quarters where disease could spread quickly and easily. They were subject to harsh discipline or just attacks by Nazi guards in the concentration camps. They were given inadequate food and water, so that many concentration camp people living in concentration camps died from starvation or being overworked. They could be killed as well, just for standing up to the Nazis, to not following directions, or being identified as being unfit for working, that they could not continue to do their jobs. They could be killed as well. As World War II progressed, especially starting in 1941 to 1945, Adolf Hitler and the Nazis decided that they would begin implementing the final solution to the Jewish question, and that's the euphemism. It's a code that they used to describe what would eventually become the attempted murder of all European Jews and people who the Nazis opposed. And concentration camps were converted to death camps, where Jews were brought to these camps not for the purpose of working, but to be killed. In total, as a result of these policies by the Nazis from 1933 to 1945, 11 million people were killed, 6 million of them being Jewish. And it was a shocking thing for the world to learn about. I mean, people around the world knew that there was anti-Semitism and racial injustice in Nazi Germany. But no one was sure, especially as World War II started, exactly what was going on and what was happening to people in Nazi-conquered territories. And what was incredibly terrifying for the world as the Holocaust was uncovered was that the Nazis were using all of the industrial technology that had been built up to that time and had been used in general to produce, like in the United States, cars, radios. They were using all of that industrial technology and those techniques to make killing as efficient as possible. And it was a shock to the world to see all of the things that they thought were part of human progress being used to stop, to deny people their humanity and their individual and natural rights. Today, just an overview of what the Holocaust was. I'm sure you still have lots of questions, and that's what I want the focus to be on for the rest of the week. What questions do you have about the Holocaust, why it happened, how it happened, specific things inside of the Holocaust? I know that when I finished 8th grade, I had a great deal of questions. When I finished 11th grade U.S. history, I still had a great deal of questions about the Holocaust, and they were never really answered all that well in school. And I want to do the best I can to try to answer some of your questions. I won't be able to answer all of them, but I will try my best. In the meantime, before I see you on Wednesday, I hope you all are safe and well. If you have any questions or concerns about anything, please contact me. I know that there was someone who said they did not have the digital access to the textbook. I have your usernames and passwords if you don't. If you need them, email me and I will send them to you. I promise. Very quickly. Within a day. Otherwise, I hope you guys all have a great day, and I will talk to you soon.